I'm Wendy Hederman. I'm currently president of the Trinity Business Alumni. The TBA is delighted to be supporting and helping to organise this Masterclass, principally for the benefit of the Trinity MBA students, but also open to all TBA members and Trinity graduates. The turnout here this evening, I think, is a testament to the relevance and topicality of this issue. I know in my own area of work, I'm a technology and contracts lawyer in Mason, Hayes and Curran. We're coming across blockchain and the potential, the use cases, the potential impact for governments, for regulation, for the way in which transactions are done. We're delighted that Deloitte, one of the corporate sponsors of the TBA, was able to provide us with expert speakers this evening who will be able to outline for you and then answer your questions on blockchain. So we are delighted that we have Anthony Day and Hannah Lynch here from Deloitte's EMEA blockchain lab. So Deloitte have their sort of European headquarters for blockchain just around the corner in John Rogerson's Quay. The objective and the purpose of the TBA is to connect graduates with Trinity, with each other, as a forum for continuing their education and also for connecting back with college and with what is happening in college, both with the student body and with the authorities. And so there is an ongoing programme of TBA activities which I hope you would find of interest once you graduate. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Anthony and Hannah.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and thank you all for attending this evening. Amazing turnout, really delighted to see so many people here, and hoping we can do our best to demystify, explain, and show some real-world examples of how blockchain as a platform technology, as a transformative technology, is transforming more or less every industry that you can imagine, from public sector to private sector. And over the course of this evening, happy to take questions, technical or otherwise, and see that we can do our best to help you leave here with a better understanding of the opportunity around blockchain and platform technologies. So to give you a little bit of a story to start, the last 5 years of my career has been spent focused on digital transformation, helping companies and clients, primarily in financial services, banks, insurance companies, payments organizations, and others, help to think about how technology can support their growth in terms of a better customer experience, in terms of operational efficiency, in terms of process efficiency, in terms of reducing pain points, in terms of becoming better companies through use of technology. And that's the overarching principle behind all technology, is that we're trying to do the jobs that we've always wanted to do, but do them better, do them faster, do them more efficiently. And so when you think about blockchain as a platform technology, all of those principles still apply. Many of you will be business people, some of you technologists, but as you're thinking about this, what I would encourage is that you think about this from a business value perspective. How can platforms help to improve the efficiency of not just enterprises individually, but entire industries? Right? And that's the interesting thing that's happened around the emergence of blockchain as a platform technology, is that it's not just individual enterprises looking at their top technology stack saying, how can we create a better app? How can we use APIs to integrate with our partners better? You're seeing consortia of banks, insurance companies, even governments coming together to say, how can we use a technology together collectively for mutual benefit? And that's different to individual organizations looking at technologies in isolation in their own houses. And that's why I took interest in blockchain and have done for a number of years, and what led me into becoming the COO of the EMEA Blockchain Lab. For those who've spent a little bit of time researching blockchain, and I'm sure many of you have, there are a number of unhelpful references in the world around what blockchain actually does and doesn't do. And so I'm hoping to dispel a couple of those myths or orthodoxies or ways that blockchain has been perceived in the media, in TED Talks, in articles, in all of the places where blockchain is being widely publicized. And I'm grateful for the hype, because it's good for business. But at the same time, it's unhelpful, and there are a number of unhelpful references that a number of our clients usually start with the question, oh, blockchain, isn't that the Bitcoin thing? And in every newspaper article you'll ever read, it starts with the unhelpful reference of blockchain, the technology behind Bitcoin. And yes, cryptocurrencies have emerged, digitization of assets, digital currencies, cryptocurrencies have emerged, and blockchain was the underlying technology or the principles underneath that. But in most enterprise cases, they're not interested in looking at blockchain for cryptocurrency. They're looking at blockchain for integration, for connectivity, for transfer of data and value, not for sharing Bitcoins. The second unhelpful reference is that in a lot of cases, people start with how blockchain works, not what it does. So you don't need to be experts in hypertext transfer protocol to know that the internet's a good thing, or that e-commerce has changed the way we do business worldwide. Right? We don't need to know how the internet works to know that it's valuable. In the same way that talking about cryptography or Byzantine fault tolerance or proof of stake or proof of work or proof of authority, the mechanisms behind why blockchain works isn't important to us as we think as business people around how to apply the technology for generating value. So unhelpful reference number 2. Unhelpful reference number 3, and the Economist has kindly given us this one, is blockchain being the trust machine. Now, if you unpick what it is that blockchain does, it does help parties that don't trust each other to connect, to collaborate, to trade. But I'm not sure if any executive, or there won't be many in my hypothesis, that on their list of KPIs in their performance review says, increase trust by X amount. Right? We have trust in certain forms today. It may be inefficient. It may be through intermediaries. It may be through lawyers. It may be through centralized platforms that are potentially less efficient than platforms that we could get otherwise through blockchain or others. But we have engineered trust into our value chains, into our ecosystems, organically over time, whether that be through creating custodians or notaries, whether it be through regulatory process, whether it be through physically locating ourselves near to our suppliers so we can see what they're doing. Trust has been engineered into society, into business, organically since time has begun. But saying that blockchain will improve trust in your business isn't a helpful reference for business people. It's not quantifiable, really. We sort of don't trust people, but we can sort of handle it in the way we do things today. So what I'll try and do, and what Hannah, I said, one of Trinity's own, will take you through a little bit later on, is how to think about blockchain and platform technologies from a business and quantifiable perspective. So I will try not to mention any of those 3 things over the next hour, and if I do, someone is happy for someone to hit a buzzer and say, you said trust or you said Bitcoin. If I do, my apologies. It's not my intention to do so. Over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, I will try and remove unhelpful references and try and give you helpful analogies and frameworks to think about blockchain as a platform differently. So this is me. My name's Anthony Day. I'm the COO of our EMEA Blockchain Lab. I've spent 15 years of my career in consulting, the first 10 years of my career at a company called Monitor Group, which was a strategy consulting company focused on helping customers to achieve growth, or to focus on customer strategy to achieve growth. The last 5 years of my career in Deloitte in the UK and Ireland has been focused, as I said, on digital strategy and helping clients to think about how to use technology to achieve growth, to achieve operation efficiencies, and also to look at new business models. And again, that's part of my transition into thinking about blockchain now specifically. Best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm doing my best to curate a thread of content that's of helpful references to people thinking about blockchain. A few infographics every now and then because those seem to get the most number of views, but also helpful articles, helpful content that helps the non-technical expert understand how blockchain is being used in practical reality. And if you're welcome to connect with me at any time. A little bit about the EMEA Blockchain Lab, Deloitte's Blockchain Lab here at Whitaker Court and John Rogerson's Quay, about a 5-minute walk just down the road. 3 years ago, Deloitte saw the potential and the opportunity and the demand from our clients to help think about blockchain as an enabling technology. There was very little from a professional service perspective in the world helping our clients to navigate how to think about blockchain or how to contextualize blockchain within the broader sphere of digital transformation. Right? We've been through PSD2, we've been through GDPR, we've been through the appification of everything. Those of you who've been in business long enough will remember e-commerce, back when we called it that. I even have a master's in e-commerce. So you can study it back when it was called that. Maybe it is still called that today, but we've been through various different iterations of jargon around how technology is impacting business. And so as a result, the leadership of Deloitte in Ireland made the bold move to invest in dedicated capability around helping clients to contextualize blockchain, but also to help build and deliver platforms and propositions to our clients in the real world. So we're a mix of about 75% technology delivery and developers, and about 25% strategists, proposition designers, and people who have this specific industry expertise, whether that be public sector, private sector, to help understand the issues, the processes, and the way things are being done today. And we we work on a range of different capabilities from, eminence and education and learning, just such sessions as this, to help our clients, to help Deloitte internally, and to help the people of Ireland and more broadly think about blockchain in an appropriate way that's relevant to them. So eminence and education is part of our role. Then it's about helping our clients to think about strategies for blockchain propositions, for consortia, and then go and build stuff, right? So to design platforms, to design propositions, to design business models using blockchain as a platform technology to connect to their peers, their suppliers, regulators, governments, to do things in a better, more efficient, more profitable, or a different way than they've been done before, to create value, ultimately. We've had about 50 proofs of concept developed by Deloitte worldwide at this point, maybe more than that. One of our most recent live deployments was with a company called DNVGL, which is a business certification company. Their goal was to put any of their certificates around ISO standards or business certifications live on blockchain for any of the suppliers or buyers of their clients to see that they have an authenticated credential. Fraud around certification and standards in procurement processes is rife, and they wanted to increase the quality and the trust within the certificates that they issue. They've got a really interesting roadmap of where they want to go next with that, and I can't tell you much about it tonight, unfortunately, but that's level one of their proposition, and we'll talk a little bit about the different levels of how blockchain is used as an underlying platform first, but how connecting with other technologies, other capabilities on top of that platform create really compelling propositions, create really compelling use cases. So that's what we do. We've had about 300 different clients through our various labs worldwide. In the lab in Ireland alone, I think we've had 100 different clients, and across financial services, governments, regulators, regional governments, private sector, public sector, luxury goods, banking, insurance, I could go on. But the important part of this is that our experience today tells us that every industry is looking at blockchain in one way or another. There is no value chain that you couldn't imagine connecting parties in that value chain better, more efficiently, more securely to create new value. There is inefficiency everywhere. There is lack of trust everywhere. I said the T word, I'm sorry. But platforms and platform businesses exist everywhere you look, and that's playing out in the demand and the interest from our clients. A little bit more about the network. There are 3 hub labs that we have globally. Our 3 main centers of excellence are based in New York, in Dublin, and in Hong Kong. And then we have 5 other spoke labs in about 20 different countries around the world with dedicated blockchain capability. We've got about 50 ecosystem partners, blockchain platforms themselves, technology companies, educational institutions, who help us to imagine the art of the possible and to work together to create really compelling businesses, platforms, and opportunities. We've got about 50 live proofs of concept and live instances of blockchain worldwide. And more broadly and importantly, a community of practice of about 1,500 people across various different business domains within Deloitte, whether that's the labs themselves, consulting, tax, legal, risk advisory, corporate finance, cybersecurity, our audit practice. And the importance of that is that blockchain as a platform or transforming industries and value chains is not just about building stuff in technology. And this is important, and as business graduates and business people in this room, your role in reimagining the way things are done is critically important. And again, I'm not going to steal Hannah's thunder, but there is a very important component to delivering transformation and digital transformations is that it is multidisciplinary. It requires multiple different components of the business and business expertise to contribute, because if you really want to transform, it's not just about plugging in a piece of technology. It's about regulation, it's about the commercial model, it's about legality of and contracts around certain activity, particularly consortia. And there's a whole bunch more that's required to take blockchain live. And we've seen that, we've been through that. That involves our own expertise, our clients' expertise, but it is truly a multidisciplinary domain. And that's really important. Here's an example, some of the 50 use cases we've looked at. I'm not going to go through every one of them, and you guys will probably be grateful for that. But there's a whole range of different cases, from the provenance and traceability of art to warranties, voting, EduScript, a proposition that we have, I'll go into a little bit more detail around professional qualifications. So looking at university degrees, CPD, regulatorily acquired qualifications. Really important platform that's costing a lot of hours, a lot of time, a lot of lag, and a lot of pain points for employees, individuals, businesses, and regulators. Digital identity, KYC, know your client, know your customer, know your supplier. Really important, really challenging, and very costly domain for a number of our clients, and more. And I'll go into a few examples over the course of this presentation. So on to some examples. Hopefully, the reason I present these is this is about giving you some examples of how blockchain is being used in the real world today and why it's interesting, to give you analogous examples that you can compare to your companies, your industries, the places that are of interest to you. Rather than listing off the things that blockchain does, I'd rather show you what it does and how it's being used. So the first example is around the provenance of diamonds. So anyone who's deeply into diamonds will know that every single diamond is unique. Like a snowflake, no two diamonds are the same. And then as a result, you can create a digital scan of that diamond that can be rescanned and checked by anybody at any time to track back where it's come from and what it's done. So De Beers created a blockchain proposition around the provenance of their diamonds to say where it was mined, at what time, in which place, abiding by anti-conflict activity and regulation. And so that diamond can be tracked and scanned from anywhere from De Beers themselves to wholesalers, retailers, individuals, even onto the secondary market if a diamond happens to be sold. You can trace back where that diamond has come from and that is non-conflict, or if you just want to know more about where it's come from. So that's a really interesting around provenance and tracing back where something has come from. Second example, and pretty much my favorite use case in blockchain, is around peer-to-peer energy trading. Now I realize this is a picture of a shiny car, but I'll get to the relevance of that in a minute. I just like the picture of the car as much as anything else. But imagine a world where, not too far away from now, a majority of houses in Ireland have solar panels or renewable energy. And we're actually able to create a surplus of energy relative to what we need to consume. And we have the solar panels, we have the wind generators, and we have storage within our homes so that actually we generate more electricity or more kilowatts than we need. And so we have an opportunity to share or to sell those kilowatts to someone else. Imagine your neighbor next door is running the washing machine, the TV, the Xbox, whatever's going on, and they have a demand for energy. And you have a really great relationship with them. You say, you know what, I've got extra kilowatts, take them. So you have an agreement, a contract to share any surplus kilowatts with your neighbor for free. Now your neighbor 2 doors down, maybe you don't get on so well, but they're connected to the same platform and they've got a demand for kilowatts too. So they're like, you know what, I'll sell you them, but I'm going to sell you them at 1 cent less than the energy company. So you're getting a good deal and I'm profiting from the surplus energy that I have. Again, a platform that manages kilowatts transferred, value, and identity. Now take that a level further, and this is where technology gets really interesting in blockchain use cases is, imagine I have a Nest device on the wall of my house that's tracking my usage, forecasting how much energy I'm going to need, and how much of that surplus I can sell on without going into risk. My neighbor has the same Nest device and knows exactly what their usage is going to be, and in real time they can trade the amount of energy that they need between what I have in storage and what they need in the real moment, and at a market price. So they can look at overall a grid of surplus supply and demand of how much energy is available and what people are prepared to pay. And you are creating an autonomous, machine-driven market for consumer-produced energy. Easy for me to say. And why the relevance of the car? The car is there to say, actually, in addition to my home, my electric car also is a storage of kilowatts. I have energy left in my battery. I know that it's going to take me however many kilowatts to drive home, and I've got plenty of storage on my Nest device back at home when I can plug in and charge up. So I can give back 20 kilowatts from my car back into the grid, and I can make 20 quid before I get home. Right? Smart devices, smart cars, digital wallets, peer-to-peer consumption and trading, secure and private. Great overall ecosystem where blockchain makes sense as the underlying platform. Digital identity. So you'll see plenty of articles around self-sovereign identity, around GDPR, around creating private identities and information that can be shared on a permission basis. KYC is a great example here. If you look at the retail banks in Ireland, every one of them has to KYC a customer individually before they apply for a product. Or if you look at investment management, every new investor, whether it's institutional or individual, has to be KYC'd at a certain point in time. And if I want to apply for 2 banks products or 2 mortgages, I have to go through the same process both times. Painful for the customer, costly for the banks. Imagine it a different way. There is a historical record of up-to-date KYC across all of the various different banks. And there's a platform that sits around all of those banks where any of the different banks can inquire, I'm looking for an active KYC record for Anthony Day. Do any of you have one? Bank B says, yes, I've KYC'd Anthony within the last 3 years. I have an active record. He is who he says he is. He's fine. My passport or my driver's license doesn't need to change hands between the different banks, but they're sharing the fact that we have created an active KYC record, and then it doesn't have to be conducted again. Saves cost, better customer experience, and GDPR compliant. Anyone who's been following the news lately, AidTech, one of the first blockchain-based startups that's been heavily publicized out of Ireland, focusing on transparency and traceability of aid and funds through from donors right down into refugee camps, where individuals have smart cards or devices where you can almost track the individual dollar down to the individual recipient, and creating much better traceability in what is a relatively complex and challenging value chain around philanthropy and aid today. Trade finance, the original step-by-step intermediated, manual, slow, painful process. I'm not going to go into the detailed intricacies of this, but a platform where the seller and the recipients can see at any point in time whether banks have issued letters of credit, whether anybody on the platform can see whether that letter of credit is being misused multiple times to apply for multiple products, where bills of lading, letters of credit, contract agreements can be automated, made available to anybody on the system, and the whole process can be made more transparent, faster, and more automated. Still complicated, but multiple parties, banks, buyer, supplier, customs agents, logistics and supply companies, good place for this to be. Number of examples of consortia. WeTrade, for example, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority announced today a collaboration with 7 banks for a trade finance platform out of Hong Kong. Deloitte helped to develop the proof of concept and have been involved as a consulting partner in that. That came out in the Financial Times yesterday, and I think in other channels today. So go check that one out too if you want more details. And lots of interesting and alternative approaches to thinking about using platforms in supply chains. Right? So we can look at traceability of where a package is in a supply chain. We can look at anti-counterfeit using RFID devices embedded within clothes. But from a capital efficiency perspective, and this is one that doesn't come up very often, we can look at pay per outcome or pay per use for certain equipment. So to take a simplified example, the lifts that are sat out there today. Maybe you've paid €200,000 to install a very shiny, very large piece of equipment, and you have a standing contract with a maintenance organization at €50,000 a year to maintain it and keep it running, all fixed cost. Not outcome based whatsoever. I've got a shiny lift in there and I've installed it. I haven't bought a shiny lift in there because I like the look of a shiny lift. Maybe you have. But ultimately what I'm paying for is altitude. What I want is to go up and down 2 floors, or 3 floors, or 5 floors. Why can't I pay every time I go up and down a floor? So the self-reporting lift, the device within the lift, communicates to the platform, to blockchain, every time it goes up and down. And a payment is made every time I go up and down a certain number of times. So I'm paying per outcome. And I don't have a maintenance contract. It's all embedded within the uptime and availability of that lift. So the maintenance company is duty bound to maintain a good quality, reliable lift. And this can apply to turbines, to pumps, to tires. Michelin has a pay-per-use agreement with some hauliers. For hauliers who are on super tight margins, even just the expense of running a new set of tires up front is capital inefficiency and very costly to them. They just run on such tight margins, it's really hard to do. So you can imagine that same thing, pay-per-use for tires, pay-per-use for lifts, pay-per-use for equipment, for pumps, on performance basis, being self-reported and managed on a platform where payments can be initiated after certain outcomes have been completed. Right? Machine-based, sensors, automated, trustworthy. I said the T word again. Sorry, I'll try to make that the last time. And 50 other great use cases from around the world that I am not going to go through one by one, but you're all welcome to have a look through these. Public sector, private sector examples, border control, energy, supply chain, healthcare, carbon offsetting, real estate. If you weren't convinced at this point that there is a place in the world for blockchain, please go and read this as well. And if you're still not convinced at that point, then there is nothing I can do for you. But hopefully there is a building body of evidence now and analogous examples that you as students or as graduates can look at and say, that sort of capability sounds a bit like something we need. Or in our industry, we have a real problem with that, and maybe we should be exploring how collaboratively or on a platform basis we can be doing things differently. So at a very, very, very basic level, this is how it works. At the moment, we have, in a number of places, inefficient intermediated processes. Trade finance, anywhere where there is a notary, a custody agent, escrow, any step where there is an intermediary there to make sure things happen as they're supposed to, if we can agree standards and if we can digitize, that can be made into a platform where any participant in the value chain or in that ecosystem can connect, transact, share data, and share value. Right? Moving from intermediated inefficient to decentralized and secure. And anybody can participate in this sort of platform. It can be businesses, it can be customers, it can be regulators, banks, lawyers, any of the above, right? We've developed a number of propositions around regulatory reporting where asset managers or retail banks and the regulator are all participants on the same chain that makes reporting of financial data or regulatory required data much more efficient because everyone is sharing the data. The regulator can have the whole view at a certain point in time, and any inconsistencies or any errors in those uploads can be identified proactively, rather than management by Excel sheet, as it happens in a number of places today, where the Excel sheets have to be looked through, have to be validated, and any change from the regulator has to be worked back in all of the historical records, where you're creating weeks of work and a cottage industry of inefficiency around reporting. So lots and lots of applications, both in a public and private sector context. This is what it looks like. A series of nodes connected by the internet that shares information. And that's what it is. One of the nodes could be Bank 1. One of the nodes could be Bank 2. Number 3 could be the regulator. Number 4 could be a law firm. Number 5 could be an aviation leasing company. Lots and lots of different examples, but essentially you're just having a number of different parties connected on the same network. Rather than having individual APIs between them, which would be technically less efficient, you're creating that underlying platform where all the participants can join and connect, like the internet. Any of you into enterprise architecture? Delighted if you are, not upset if you're not, but at a basic level, how does blockchain work with existing technologies? I am oversimplifying, but the short answer is APIs. That is it. You don't have to transform your legacy system significantly. You do need to look at data architecture. You do need to look at transfer of information. But the good news is big tech has got onto this as well. So the likes of Microsoft, Amazon, SAP, Oracle are all working on pre-configured blockchain integrations for their enterprise platforms. So over time, you're going to make it easier for enterprises to connect to blockchain through their existing systems. Right? And that's important because that makes adoption easier. That means you don't have to go individually to connect participants to a chain. It's going to be easier and pre-configured, or at least much easier to do so, because those platforms have already identified the need to connect with blockchains. So that's really exciting. Bad news for the startups, because a lot of the hard work that's been done at the beginning and the very emergence of blockchain is they've created the chains, the connectivity, the interfaces, the APIs, the user interface, the apps, all for the enterprise who wants to buy them out, because they can do the integration early, because they're first movers. But unfortunately, and the sad news is over time, if they're just doing something that the world already has or enterprises are already clocked into, it's possible that those startups become less valuable or less valid because enterprises together can connect and do those integrations themselves. That's the last slightly technical bit I'm going to do. But the good news is for large corporates or for enterprise, it's going to be easier to connect to this sort of ecosystem in future. Okay, I wasn't quite correct. There is one slightly more technical bit, and then we'll move on. Permissioned versus permissionless, public versus private. Back to the argument around Bitcoin. Sorry, I wasn't going to mention it, but I have. There is a good amount of noise made around the inefficiency or the energy consumption of public blockchains where mining is used to validate transactions, where proof of work as a consensus mechanism is used to validate that transactions can happen. Public networks are expensive in that way, but for an enterprise audience, the primary focus around blockchain technology in enterprise is private permissioned. Private network between the parties who are participating, so no information is made publicly. Permissioned, so in the example with the banks, the regulator can see everything, an individual bank can only see its own submissions. That's as much as you need to know in reality. Private permissioned blockchains. More detail on this, plenty of YouTube videos, plenty of TED Talks out there if you want to go into more detail. But from an enterprise perspective, the main focus is likely to be around private permissioned. And those platforms are likely to be Corda, Quorum, Ethereum, and a number of others that are emerging. But this is not a platform talk, so I'm not going to go into that anymore. So I'm now going to go into 2 industries. I couldn't cover them all. The 50 examples are up there, and you guys are welcome to look at them separately. But I'm going to go through a few use cases specifically on financial services and then on aviation. 2 different ends of the sexiness spectrum, I suspect, but also 2 very important industries for Ireland. So if we can contextualize that, and I'm sure a number of you here are working in financial services, maybe some of you are working in aviation, and also hopefully relatable to others who aren't working in those 2 industries either. But to give a little bit more in terms of context, a few more examples on top of what I've already covered. So some examples of real blockchain projects or real platforms that exist out there today. Creating a syndicated loan market. Syndicated loans, basically where a loan agreement is split up between multiple banks. So then you can imagine that those multiple banks need to manage their respective stakes or sell them on, and you need to know who owns which part of the syndicate at what time, whether you want to buy in and buy out. A great example of creating a platform for multiple banks who are traditional competitors to work together to syndicate and to lend together. Utility settlement coin. Really interesting concept around settlement between banks and trying to create not actual financial transactions, but a coin where we can have a point in time understanding of how much is owed between the banks. And so that you can settle at a more efficient or capital efficient or cost efficient manner rather than settling on a periodic basis. Interesting concept on that one. Cross-border payments, integrated payment solutions, automated reconciliation, sometimes using Ripple, sometimes using native currencies. KYC utility, I think I've talked about, but again, that is relevant in most industries and is a really important opportunity. Deloitte have worked here in Ireland with Irish funds and with Bank of Ireland on KYC propositions, and really interesting to see that that's going to come to fruition soon, we hope. So again, very interesting and lots of potential room for that. Validating trading data, looking at blockchain for private equity and tokenizing assets, tokenizing loans, lots of places that can go, but real world companies, real world banks where that is going in real life. And some more. And again, I'm not going to go through them all, but hopefully some examples you can take away with you. Cross-border payments, trade finance, KYC, regulatory reporting, we covered all of those. So I'm doing my job. EduScript, I talked about that at the beginning of the show. That's a platform that Deloitte worked on here, also with Bank of Ireland, around MCC, minimum competency code. So by regulation, people working in banking or in financial services have to have a certain number of CPD hours complete or certain qualifications complete so that they can still trade and practice. And if they don't, there are fines associated with it. AXA received a significant fine a couple of years ago, and there is a regulatory overhead and a regulatory consideration for all the banks. At the same time, it's a pain point for the employee. So there are a number of training institutions that clock and manage CPD hours. They have to then either manually or by Excel sheet move those hours back to the employer. The employer has to then go through their own internal process around whether those hours have been logged. And at some point that results in a salary uplift for the employee. But that can take somewhere between 2 or 3 months in the worst cases to come through. Imagine you've done your training, you're due a salary uplift and you want it to happen straight away, but the process that happens behind that is particularly slow. Manual, intermediated, great place for a platform to exist, where any CPD hours can be viewed by anybody at any time, the employee, the HR professional, the regulator. If you move financial institution, that data can move with you on a permissioned basis, and you can allow any institution, a recruiter, take that to the furthest end. It could be the fully verified version of your LinkedIn profile. Right? Lots of potential for where that can go, and that's a really exciting proposition that I think we'll hopefully see go and do big things in Ireland and beyond. Proxy voting, bonded loans, lots more. But again, lots of examples of how it's happening in financial services. In aviation, talk about some challenges. Those of you who are familiar with aviation, you've got challenges around aircraft maintenance and historical records. You've got the lessors who are transitioning aircraft, and it's a particularly painful process. Every transition goes through having to have the history of that aircraft, maintenance, activity, its jurisdiction it was operating in, shared, validated, audited, very slow, very challenging. And if you go through a process with an aircraft from a lessor and an airline, the process today is completely trustless. That's a different word. I didn't say trust and oh, damn it. Never mind. You go through an 8-year lease with an airline. They'll look every year at whether the aircraft is being maintained. They'll check the records and just make sure that everything's going on. Maybe above board, maybe not. There may be some shenanigans going on. Different parts may have been moved on and off the aircraft over time. Parts pooling is common. There's a lot of lack of transparency around how that process happens. And then you get to the end of the lease and you go through the final audit. All the paperwork, all the data, all the oily fingerprinted manual documents around what should have been said to have happened. And then records are lost. Maintenance history isn't present. And for the lessor, you don't know necessarily whether the turbine blades or the landing gear has been maintained to the appropriate standard. And there's a very sad phrase that goes associated with this, which is called loss of life. So if we cannot verify that a part has been maintained before it can be moved on to the next customer, it has to be at an operating standard. So it might be that half of the life of a piece of landing gear or a turbine blade or an engine has to be fully replaced because we cannot verify that something's happened or it has been maintained appropriately. And then comes the dispute and the lawyers and the agreement to settle on whether or not maintenance has or hasn't happened or whether the records are appropriate or not. Particularly painful, very long, very timely process at the end of the lease. The aircraft, while it's going through this process, is not being operated, particularly painful. The transfers and the trading of aircraft between lessors also has an equally challenging process, all of which is crying out for some sort of platform where data and information can be exchanged easily. Right? I can go into more examples, but it's a really challenging industry, and there's multiples of hundreds of millions involved. Disparate data, disparate systems, a lot of paper, a lack of standards. KYC also a problem. Reporting to regulators, to aviation authorities. A lot of paper, a lot of manual. Can we do it better? Well, yes. There's also a number of kind of other fun, interesting cases around using platforms around aviation and airlines. Singapore Airlines announced at the end of last year that all of its airline miles are going to be put on blockchain. So all of its participating partners, hotels, restaurants, leisure groups, will be able to have a record of a person's points, the points that are used in real time, making the efficiency around settlement, around rebates, around refunds, much, much faster, much, much easier. In the US alone, loyalty is a $35 billion industry around the processing of loyalty points. Imagine that. That is a ridiculous amount of money for intermediary management of receipts, of paperwork, of status, of settlement, of payment, of rebate, all of which can be taken out if we can agree standards and a platform where the participants in KrisFlyer or whichever Avios or whichever network of points you happen to be in. Now, the more participants, the more complicated, but it's possible, and it's being done today. Automated insurance payouts. AXA has delivered a blockchain proposition in Asia called Fizzy, where it will allow you to pay for your flight delay insurance, and it will know if a certain flight is delayed beyond a certain amount of time, and you're entitled to a payout, it'll settle automatically. It'll pay you straight away. Now, blockchain is not necessarily the only technology for doing this. There are examples of others who aren't. But from that Fizzy perspective, it's interesting to know where it might go. So as an insurer, they're looking to minimize the amount of risk on their portfolio, on their balance sheet. So typically a lot of that risk is sold off then to reinsurers. And imagine then that the portfolio of risk around Fizzy, because there's potentially a high amount of payouts, a high amount of risk, they could tokenize those particular parts of the portfolio that are less performing or those particular risks and sell them on or have other reinsurers connect to that platform more efficiently so you could do settlement, management of risk much, much faster, much, much easier. Right? Really cool example. I don't know whether that's where they're going with it, but my hypothesis would be Fizzy as it is today is 101, and there's lots of other places that can go to around automated, near real-time settlement of insurance based on things we can prove with data, rather than someone having to submit a photo or a claim. Self-managing, self-reporting, automated insurance. Really interesting idea. We covered a few of the areas in aircraft leasing. Airport slots, creating a platform for airports and airlines to have real-time visibility on slots that are free based on aircraft that are delayed, being able to create a marketplace for that. Again, at the moment, quite inefficient, lots of ops teams making lots of phone calls at the moment today, quite challenging. So again, that could be within a jurisdiction or that could become global, but lots of opportunities there. Interline agreements, particularly around passenger movements between two airlines, particularly challenging, particularly painful for those airlines that haven't got an efficient back office system, something that could be improved with a platform between those airlines. And as new partners come on board, as new airlines join the consortia, you can just onboard them in the same place and they can go straight through the same process, made more efficient. Paper use we've covered for parts and equipment, lifecycle management around the aircraft's ownership, repairs, even geolocation. The self-reporting aircraft is something that I'm really interested in as a concept. It's technically feasible today as saying that actually as part of a lease agreement, I will agree to the aircraft being able to fly in certain jurisdictions. I will agree that the aircraft will be operated in a kind and gentle manner. Right? So if the aircraft reports that its landing gear has been through heavy landings over a certain number, over a certain tolerance in the course of a month, the lessor has to trigger a maintenance event. Or if the lessee can prove that the maintenance has been done on time with the right documentation digitized, we'll give you an incentive. Right? Creating proactive good behavior based on outcomes and incentives, machine reported or not. Great example for creating a platform where everybody can collaborate on that. Really, really good example, and I really want to see that happening too. So that's it for the use cases, the examples. Hopefully some good references. Not all of them will resonate with the industries you're in. Not all of them will be directly relevant to what you're doing today, but hopefully it's given you a little bit of a breadth of what's being done in the world. And what Hannah's going to do next is give you an idea of how to think about blockchain and platform businesses from a business perspective, from a student's perspective, from a professional's perspective. You know, if the I want one of those blockchain use cases doesn't work for you, hopefully this will. Hannah?
So our 2018 global survey of more than 200 C-level suite executives revealed that blockchain is a top priority for half of companies nowadays. So while we can see that this appetite is there from industries, it maybe hasn't trickled down to seeing it at consumer level yet. But what I feel like we must realize is that if 50% of industries today are interested in blockchain, it means we as business people need to take an interest in knowing how to translate the opportunities that blockchain could provide into delivering a real business value. So what we've seen in Deloitte is that clients coming to us see three main roadblocks with moving forward with blockchain. So regulatory issues, integrating with legacy systems, and mitigating security threats. And what we're happy to say is that all three of these can be addressed during the design stage. So something like regulatory issues around perhaps like tokenization or complying with data compliance such as GDPR can be solved by creating an anonymous string of data known as hashing. Integrating with legacy systems can be done the same way that all new technologies before blockchain have been done by creating APIs allowing old technology to communicate with new. And mitigating security threats is perhaps an issue which blockchain has gotten perhaps a little bit of a bad rap off, mainly due to the Bitcoin space. So although we've seen a number of issues around coins being stolen from various Bitcoin exchanges, we can't differentiate this perhaps from bank heists which have happened in the past. And if we're to perhaps look at a bank heist which might have happened in AIB years ago, no one would blame the entire banking system and say that the banking system is broken because that security threat happened. There's security issues which need to be fixed there, but the blockchain system by nature is difficult to hack. And issues around Bitcoins being stolen isn't necessarily like indicative of any security issues with the platform itself. So any technology transformation aims to do three core things: to drive incremental growth, to drive operational efficiency, or to create new business models. And blockchain is no different. So for me, I like to look at the third world economy to realize where blockchain can make a difference in these three core areas. So if we're to look at the first, to drive incremental growth, for me to transfer money to you isn't that difficult in the first world. We do it through an intermediary body, a bank. But if we're sitting in Tanzania, perhaps neither of us have a bank account. That makes that transaction significantly more difficult. We're implementing a blockchain and allowing peer-to-peer transfer. We're allowing individuals to drive that growth themselves through the use of this platform. Driving operational efficiency then. As Anthony previously mentioned, very interesting Irish company, AidTech, is significantly transforming operations in donations in the charitable sector, improving operational efficiency. So what AidTech have been able to do is to track your donation to a charity directly to the consumer at the other end. So it can track like your €10 donation to Red Cross then transferring that €10 to their Red Cross station in Tanzania, and then a mother in Tanzania transacting with that money that you gave them to buy medicine for their child, and that entire process is mapped on a blockchain. And finally, creating new business models. So previously, if you are an entrepreneur in the third world, getting investment can be very difficult. Nowadays, with ICOs enabled through blockchain platforms, individuals with a good idea can raise millions for their business idea simply by putting their idea up on a platform that allows donations from anywhere all over the world. So blockchain has a number of unique benefits which make it different to other platforms, including transparency, connectivity, automation, and traceability. But what do these really mean for business? And how can we translate these features into real business value? So as business people, this is what we really need to be able to understand and to deliver to clients. What the questions that we need to be asking are not, can the blockchain automate a process? But rather, does this process need to be automated? Does automating the process eliminate a cumbersome task and eliminate a lot of man hours that are involved in executing that task? Does taking out these inefficiencies in the system deliver a better experience to our customers? And more so than that, can we put a percentage cost, a reduction in capital spent, or a reduction in time spent on this task? And can we quantify that benefit for the employer, communicate it to them to prove and to illustrate the real value of applying blockchain to that problem? In exploring blockchain, the key is not to think of blockchain in isolation. The real value of blockchain is seen when we can understand blockchain paired with other new and emerging technologies such as IoT, AI, medtech, and 3D printing. So if we're to consider a basic supply chain, as Anthony illustrated, we could take the different transactions on a supply chain and map them on the blockchain so that we have all of them tracked from start to finish. And that would be great. All of the information is there, it's traceable, no one can corrupt that data, and maybe different parties on the blockchain can see it. But we still might need parties to come and understand that data. So maybe by adding IoT, we can get sensors in a factory to report that data themselves rather than a man sitting beside the machine inputting the data onto a system. Maybe by adding AI, we can add the capability to understand that data and make predictions for the future. Implementing a blockchain solution isn't easy. And what we need to do to make the most of it is to incorporate a multidisciplinary approach. Designing a blockchain solution can't be done by putting 4 developers into a room and asking them to solve a problem. What we really need is to incorporate all levels of a business and all areas of a business even into designing the solution. So developers might be able to design a smart contract, but it doesn't mean that that smart contract would work in the real world. What we need to execute that smart contract and make it commercially viable is to have our legal team, our risk team, our commercials team, people who know our clients in the room, we need IT experts, and we need people who understand risk compliance in that system. So that is when we can really see the value of blockchain. So finally, blockchain is not a suitable solution for everything. And we've seen a lot of design trees indicating when and where we should use blockchain and when we shouldn't. And for us, we've come up with 20 core criteria that we should consider when evaluating whether or not to use a blockchain. So first, we should start with the value identification. So there's a lot of information that we have and that we have to share that's necessary to share but isn't necessarily valuable. So if you were to look at this room, when Trinity was buying the carpet for this room, it was necessary for them to know that the carpet was green. But that information and that transfer of that information isn't necessarily valuable to anyone. Yet, if we're to think of that on a supply chain management scale, if we're to put when the order was received onto a blockchain and allow parties to be able to see when products were sent from A to B and that the products were received and that funds were transferred, that's a valuable transfer of information. But the fact that the carpet that was transferred was green isn't valuable to anyone. And we need to consider what the information is that we're transacting and whether it's valuable to put that onto a blockchain. Secondly, we need to look at our ecosystem. If we're trying to facilitate a transfer of information between two people, we can do that between us. I can send information to you, you can send information to me in a secure way. However, if we have a number of parties, perhaps consider the Irish banking industry. So if we have AIB, BOI, Ulster Bank, and the regulator, and as Anthony mentioned, they all want to share information about KYC. Those parties all have very different interests, and 3 of them are competitors. They're not necessarily interested in sharing all information together. So they're not going to want to share all of their data on an open ecosystem together. But what they are interested in is being able to help each other in a way that they can transfer the need to know data that's secure. So what we would say is that if you're looking at an ecosystem where parties have different interests and need to transact to make their operations more efficient, then that's a good use case for a blockchain. And finally, technical feasibility. One of the interesting use cases we're examining in the lab at the moment is farm to fork. So bringing traceability to our food industry. So if you think about that, money perhaps is an easy thing to envision on a blockchain. A cow on a blockchain is a lot more difficult. It's not a digital asset, it doesn't have a chip inside it, and facilitating all of that seems quite difficult. So what we need to evaluate in that case is like at what point we can digitize the cow. Do we digitize it at birth? Do we digitize it when it's in a packing factory? And we want to know where it goes after that. So that's one of the key questions we need to add with where we start our blockchain journey. And finally, what we need to remember is that there are showstoppers. One of the core questions we always ask is, do you own the problem? And are you the person to solve the problem? So what this encompasses is whether you alone are responsible for solving that problem. So in that case, like if we're to go back to perhaps the food industry, if it's a small supplier, he has an issue with his supply chain because someone never pays him on time, he perhaps isn't the right party to try and solve or try and create a blockchain for the entire beef industry in Ireland. So that really needs to be examined on whether the party in question is the person to solve or whether they need to encompass a wider ecosystem to be able to solve that problem. And lastly, can this problem be solved by traditional technology? And that's one of the things that we would always strive to look at in the lab, is to examine on an objective level, do we need to just throw blockchain at this problem? Or can we do it using other systems that exist already that perhaps aren't as costly and solve the problem just as efficiently or perhaps more efficiently than blockchain in the given case? So what we've seen in the lab is that we can develop a pilot for a blockchain product in as little as 8 weeks. So I suppose on that note, our advice to industry is to iterate often and to experiment with the technology, try out use cases, see what works for industry, see what doesn't. It doesn't take an enormous amount of time to bring something through the different levels of development, and to see, can a further use case be put forward for whatever industry it is that any of you are in. And on that, I'm going to hand back to Anthony. Thanks.
Thank you, Hannah. In conclusion, we've had a lot of information, probably a little bit of jargon, lots of examples, a few technical phrases that may or may not have made sense, some content that may or may not have resonated. But ultimately, if I can leave you with 5 concepts to take away, let them be these. Think about platforms. I probably said the word platform about 500 times tonight, but that is the core artifact that blockchain is. It is a platform on which people can connect and participate. Platform businesses are not new to the world. Amazon is a platform. Airbnb is a platform. Uber is a platform, right? Think about, what is it that platforms do within my industry? How can different participants connect in ways that we don't do today, or that could be better than we do today? And research platforms, look at platform theory. As MBA grads or as MBA students, there is documentation upon documentation around platform economics, platform business models, platform theory. All of it is out there, and all of it is applicable to blockchain and non-blockchain as well. So go through the Amazon case studies, go through all of the examples that go back, and apply the same thinking, apply the same value criteria to blockchain types of questions, and you'll probably be on the right track. Second point, as Hannah said, is don't treat blockchain in isolation. It is the underlying technology which supports those participants sharing information and value, but it is not the only technology that can be used in those value chains. As Hannah said, IoT, smart sensors, self-reporting aircraft, self-reporting lifts, the analytics that sit on top of the information that's being shared by the different devices that tells you what the real-time price of electricity in a consumer-driven market or a prosumer market is, can be massively powerful. Take a multidisciplinary approach. If you're brainstorming around new ideas or applications, don't just bring the business guys to the room. Don't just bring the tech guys to the room. Bring a lawyer, bring a tax person, bring a finance professional, bring somebody who understands the industry, bring someone who understands supply chain, bring someone who understands regulation and risk. All of these factors need to be considered before we re-engineer anything. This is a digital transformation concept overall. It is not a single discipline that dictates how things transform. It's all of us. It's the entire organization. It's the entire industry. And so as a result, the stakeholders and the participants in that industry are pretty sure going to want to have a say and listen. Consider the capabilities that platforms like blockchain provide. We talked about transparency, we talked about traceability, we talked about automation, collaboration. Right now, that's a bit of an intangible, but as I said at the beginning of the show, blockchain's ability to bring traditional competitors and public sector governments and regulators together to rethink how things get done, I believe is a relatively new paradigm in the last 5 years. It's not never heard of, but it is intensifying, it is accelerating. And so think about the digital capabilities that platforms like blockchain can provide in a business, in an industry. As students, think about it that way. Think about what it brings and how you can quantify or create a business case around how that could play out, not just how does it work. And then finally, do something about it. Do some reading. Go to some hackathons. Watch some TED Talks. Build a proof of concept. As Hannah said, it doesn't take long to spin up a node, a user interface, some lines of code, and to create a smart contract. It's actually very straightforward. Anybody who has a basic understanding of Java can clock onto blockchain relatively quickly. And if you so desire, blockchain and blockchain teams in Deloitte are more than happy to talk through use cases and ideas with you guys and help build them, if that's of interest to you. We're doing a lot. We're working with a number of different industries in Ireland and abroad. As an EMEA lab, we're very lucky to have the pleasure of working anywhere between Canada and Saudi Arabia on any given week. And that's really fascinating because you get to hear the different way things are done, the different problems, the different pain points. And across different industries, there are analogous examples of where something is painful in the public sector, it's the same in the private sector. Or when you hear something in manufacturing, the same is true of energy and resources, or between banking and aviation. This is an industry of analogies. So the more you read, the more examples you see, the more of the principles and the benefits you can unpick, the more you can see how it resonates or how it's relevant in your respective industries or domains of study. And so finally, I'll leave you with the only decision tree that matters. Do I need a blockchain? Yes. You may not know it yet, but you probably do. Thank you very much.